about 10 minutes. Oh,
Sorry.
thank you, Mayor. Well, I'll start over. So we only have 3 agenda items today. And I'll go ahead and give an overview and I will put them in the chat. I sent an email, I think that was like late last night, but I will put them in the chat as well. Our 3 items are pretty straightforward. One, per Representative Wattenberg's recommendation, we reached out to Professor Hennig to join us to talk about just perspectives on governance systems and what changes we might be able to make and things he has seen through his research. 2, we're going to get an update on our survey and just like how that's doing, like who's responded, prepare for our final push. And 3, an update on the focus groups because we have some changes to just how those are going to happen. So pretty simple, but I'm hopeful, pretty productive hour or so of our time. So I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to, and I will say thank you to Professor Hennig, because I know that you saw my frantic email and you responded and you were like, sure, I'm happy to talk to you all. So if you could just give like a voiceover on like your perspective on this issue of just like governance, schools, mayoral control, and we can kind of start from there. Oh, you're on mute though. That's always me. Like I'm always talking on mute.
So thanks. So let me just sort of give a little orientation in terms of how what I might bring to this. I don't want to lecture. I'd rather just respond to questions because I'm not sure what exactly you're grappling with. I'm a political scientist. I was at George Washington University in political science for 25 years. And while I was there, part of the time I directed the Center for Washington Area Studies. So I was closely following DC politics and school politics during that period. In 2002, I moved to Teachers College at Columbia, where I am now. So I've focused a lot on education governance. I co-edited a book on mayoral control that had a chapter on DC, but also looked at other cities. I've been following the New York City case closely. Oh, yes, I'll just sign it right now. I'll give a really capsule take on this. I think school governance is important. I think the governance structure, that's things like whether you've got an elected or appointed board, whether the board appoints both the superintendent and whether the board appoints a superintendent or chancellor, or whether the mayor does, whether the board's elected at ward base or at large. All those things make a difference, and they make a difference like the rules of the game do in a sporting event, and that's both in the sense that they structure what happens. They give certain advantages to certain kinds of players. Some players in sports, do better when the distance for a home run is further. Some players do better when the infield grass in a baseball game is cut so that grounders go more quickly through the infield, but they don't determine the end of the game. Okay, and so while I think governance is important as a background factor that tilts advantage in one direction or another, some towards parents, others more towards business community, for example, a lot of other things matter just as much, and I'd include there kind of the politics, the coalitions that exist, who works with whom well, what the history, the local political history, and what lessons key actors have learned about who to trust and who not to trust over time. Those things matter as well. I've looked, and I'll stop. I said I wouldn't lecture, so I'm going to stop in just a second. But I've as have other people, tried to look across the examples of mayoral control to see, does it work? Does it not work? That's the question we usually get first, and the answer is it's pretty much a mixed bag, and some of the places that went to mayoral control early, like Chicago, which early on was the place everyone was looking to and pointing to as the model, has now gone back to is going back to an elected board. There's Boston, which was another early mayoral control city, it has on and off had unhappiness about that, and is now under the threat of state takeover. So there's no governance solution that's kind of leads clearly to higher test scores or greater parent satisfaction. It's one factor in a melange of factors that matter.
Thank you. I'm totally happy and I know Representative Wattenberg tends to be a fan of questions and conversation. I should say, so right now the State Board of Education is taking a look at what could it mean to move forward with changes to our governance structure, and what problems, if we make changes, what problems are we hoping to solve with those changes? So just to when thinking about, as you said, certain conditions benefit different actors, I would be curious to just explore a bit more with you about like our current governance structure and who you think it advantages and who you think it maybe doesn't.
Well, the simplest thing and the thing that cuts across places is that mayors have a different electoral constituency than elected school boards do. I mean, they're elected at large, and they're elected in general purpose elections that usually have a higher turnout, more involvement with people for whom schools may not be the top issue, or even in the top 5 issues. So mayors have a different constituency they're responding to than do elected school board leaders, especially if those elected school board leaders are elected ward-based rather than at large. And mayors, interact with a range of interest groups, like business interests, like real estate interests, doing the rest of their work, and that means that those groups sometimes have an advantage in terms of getting the ear of a mayor over what they'd experience more in a elected school board run city, where the folks who are most involved are the people who care a lot about education, and where the parents and teachers union, depending on the city, are kind of more on top of things than are some of these other kinds of interest groups.
Thank you. I appreciate that perspective. I represent Wattenberg.
Hello, thank you. So I want to talk about sort of two of as Representative Thompson said, part of what we're looking at is what, if any, kinds of changes are merited. And we're doing a survey of really constituents, mainly families, that's really about responsiveness, like to what extent is this system responsive, not responsive. But I want to put to you a couple of questions that aren't so much about responsiveness, but about other aspects of this. And let me start with one that we've talked about a lot across the city, which is the checks and balances issue. And DC, one way, and no matter how you slice it, we're sui generis, right? We're a state and we're a city. But one result of that is that we're mayoral control, and the mayor names both the chancellor and the state superintendent. So we're the only place in the country where mayoral control means really there's no state oversight, no independent oversight of your local district, because they're both named by the same person. So you just don't have the principles of checks and balances working. And there's a long list of things that different people say would have been helped by that. I mean, the one that got the most media attention, of course, was our high school graduation scandal, where there was a lot of sense that there wasn't the checks and balances that would have prevented pressure on the schools to not jack up their grad rates. But that's just one example. There's others.
Sure.
So what would you do about that, given that we're DC and,
Yeah. Well, I mean, DC is not radically different from New York City in that regard, where the mayor appoints most of the members of the panel on education policy, which is the equivalent of a school board, and also appoints the chancellor. And that's been a controversy, and the New York State legislature, has been responding to parent concerns.
but wait, no, but I
Yeah.
want to interrupt to make sure we understand the question. New York City, the mayor names that little board, and the mayor names the chancellor. The mayor does not name the state superintendent of
Okay,
education.
yeah, so you're talking about yeah.
Yeah, I'm saying, so in New York City, the mayor has all that control, but the state, as we've seen over and over, whether it's the legislature or the state board or the governor or very often the state superintendent, is overseeing that. So there's a limit to what can go wrong. We don't have that.
Yeah. No, I was focusing more on the checks and balances between the branches, more the legislative function than the executive. I hear you're talking about the federal system or the intergovernmental. Yeah, I mean that, I think that, there's been a constant tension in US governance, not just in school boards, between systems that are designed to get things done more expeditiously and those that are designed to put some kind of checks on power because of concern about abuse of power or dominance by a particular interest groups. I mean, we deal with this at the national level now all the time as well. And, that's just simply to underscore the fact that, that there's this back and forth notion, that some people would look at DC and the lack of a state level, heavy regulatory arm as an advantage, that makes the system more responsive to local actors than is the case when you've got a state legislature and governor and a state board of education that are responsive not just to, say, New York City, but to the suburbs of New York City and the rural areas in New York State and things like that. So, so there's things to be gained and things to be lost by checks and balances. I think the key question is what kinds of checks and balances, and again, the politics that runs into this. In a lot of states, historically, the states have been hands off and really deferential to local, either deferential or simply uninterested in some of the details of how cities have dealt with their schools. And in other states, they've been very hands-on. Those are variations that no one's really been able to track down. What does this mean in terms of whether the schools do a good job in terms of educating kids? But what is clear is when parents feel unheard, when parents feel like that the key decisions are being made by people whose concerns are different than theirs, either because they're influenced by education reformers who are pushing charter schools or pushing vouchers, or they're influenced by Congress that at one time or another may, in DC, may play that role. And parents have not been happy. And in particular, in particular, there's a racial cast to this as well, which is minority parents have generally in many places felt like they've been marginalized by governance systems that are not ward-based and are not geared to school-specific kinds of elections, as opposed to general purpose elections. To me, that's, another dimension of these issues we're talking about, is how much of the governance takes place in school focused institutions versus mayor's offices or state legislatures or Congress, general purpose arenas where the understanding and interest in issues about curriculum and instruction, responsiveness to teachers as professionals is often different. I may not still be getting at your question, Ruth, and if so, I apologize, and you could take another shot at it.
Well, I don't want to monopolize. So Rep. Thompson, you're welcome to jump in, or staff. I guess it's, so I like the way you talk about the issue with governance is it's rules of the game. And it's sort of, so it's not, in the end, you can't say who's going to win or lose or what's going to happen, but what are the rules of the game? And I guess part of what I'm interested in, but it may just be too local specific, is given our weird setup, I do feel like the rules of the game we currently have, you make the point that actually we're better off because we don't have to worry about Albany. And that's true. I hadn't really thought about it that way. And that's absolutely true. But I guess as rules of the game, we lost a lot of checks and balances. And in a city where, part of what mayoral control does, and you've written about this, is, or I guess there's so much at stake in our educational system. I guess that's what I want to say, is there's so much at stake in our educational system. On the one hand, it really is important to the mayor. That would be true of mayors everywhere, right? That at work. And so it's also really important to the education reform world, quote unquote, in the sense that, we have more charters than anywhere except for New Orleans, and people really want it to succeed and they want it to look like it succeeds. It's got mayoral control. There's a group of people that really want it to succeed. And then, of course, there's everybody else who desperately wants a really functioning, effective school system. Stakes are high.
Right.
In that game where the stakes are so high, what are rules that you can have? And I'm asking you as someone who's sort of looked at lots of different rules, right?
Yeah.
What's a way that we can have rules of the game that have more checks and balances, that put some constraints on people's ability to rig it to win, but without losing the efficient, and I know that at some level it's a trade-off, but what could move us?
Well, so maybe I don't know if this would help, but one thing to remember is you can talk about what is it that's moved to the state level, or is what particular functions, rather than just in general more versus less. So for example, it seems to me that the DC State Board of Education, I think this is the case already a little bit, but first of all, one thing is data and data transparency. And I know that's been a discussion that's gone on in DC, but, monopoly control is really a problem when the same bureaucracy and the same leaders are running the show and control access to information, all kinds of information on school level funding, information on teacher turnover, information on parent involvement, information on test scores. Test scores is the familiar thing. So playing a role in terms of controlling, or at least controlling the rules around data, what data is available, how do people get access to it, that's both parents and researchers, things like that, is one function that can get moved up to a quote state level that plays an important role, not just in a accountability that comes attached to automatic penalties and rewards like we associate with No Child Left Behind. If schools don't do well, this happens, and but accountability that's both bureaucratic, so that someone oversees it, and democratic, which is making sure that there's more information available to parents and community organizations, that they can actually figure out whether some parts of the city are getting the short end of the stick in terms of distribution of resources and things like that, and to do it in a way that isn't manipulable, isn't easily manipulable, which is what you get when you have one bureaucracy controlling this thing. They may know that, oh, if you look at funding per school, that's really driven by the seniority of the teachers there and doesn't really relate to how much discretionary funds are at the school. So we need different kinds of indicators. Those are the kinds of things I think you could move up out of out of DCPS and ideally across the charter world too. And I think there'd be strong support in much of the community for the idea of data transparency and access, but it wouldn't involve micromanaging in the ways that sometimes generate the complaints about the state intrusion.
I mean, that's very useful.
Yeah, I think that I appreciate that perspective. And I guess in that conversation, another conversation that we are having as a city is what does it look like to prepare for statehood? And it's not lost on me, and I don't want to take for granted that we right now are performing both like what would be considered in most spaces local ed functions and state level functions in a lot of the same entities. And so I am curious if there are specific parts that you would separate out as like, right now DC has local and state together here, and they have the opportunity to, because they should be separate. Maybe not in the way that is like, we have to worry about Albany and them worrying about all the other jurisdictions, but to your point about just different layers and like who controls information versus like who is supposed to, who controls information, who has oversight, and then like who is performing certain functions, if that makes sense as buckets.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to, I don't think you can forget the fact that these things are messy in a lot of places. They're not just messy in DC, they're messy in different ways, right? So,
thank you for calling out that we are not unique in our messaging.
Yeah, no, not at all. And state legislatures micromanage sometimes and get involved in ways that are, what it does seem to me, and it is worth thinking about, it is a real difference that the geographical boundaries of the State Board of Education and DCPS and the charter school boards, and these are all the same. So you're not talking about different constituencies. You're not talking about a state role that's designed to ensure that there's some kind of a consistency across a state from city to suburb to rural. That's not the issue. And you don't have a different broadly conceived electoral constituency. It's the same groups and the same actors who are playing the game. So for example, to me, that means that, it could be a mess if you had the state board doing curriculum and the local DCPS doing curriculum and fighting over, critical race theory or things like that. That's just going to drive everyone crazy, and they're going to, you're going to have a situation of what political scientists talk about as venue shopping, where different interest groups kind of decide which level of government to point their attack at, where they'll have greater access. I don't think that serves a purpose in terms of coherent, not just governance, but coherent democracy. Like from a coherent democracy standpoint, it helps to have some sense of who does what. But you don't in the US in any area have real clean divisions. People sort of say, what does the local government do? What does the state government do? What does the national government do? And the answer is there's a lot of contested territory, right? Political scientists used to talk about a layer cake model of federalism, local, state, national, and then very famously back in the 1950s, a political scientist by the name of Morton Grodson said, no, it's really a marble cake, you know, because you take any function and each of these levels it has its, you know, its nose in the business to some extent. So it's good to try to think about clarity. I do think, you know, just to go back to the general point, I don't think it serves the interests of communities to like change the rules of the game every 2 years or every 4 years. I mean, this is something that should be considered. And ideally, you know, the rules of the game should be relatively constant. You know, we don't want, you know, just to go back to my, you know, sports metaphor, you know, again, you don't want every year there's going to be a debate about whether there's a designated hitter or whether, you know, maybe we should have, you know, 7-inning games instead of 9-inning games and things like that. You want some consistency so people know what the map is, you know, in which they're operating. But the notion of a course correction, you know, I think that, you know, that's well thought out, that reflects the fact that DC is a changing community, and it's, you know, and the governance issues are particularly complicated there. And if Congress is, you know, it's one story if Congress, you know, one thing is a statehood issue, right? The other thing is Republicans sweep, you know, in the midterms, and then you're going to have, you know, congressional efforts to dictate to DC schools, you know, you don't want to open the governance issue in a way that invites other people to continually reopen it either, it seems to me.
I hear that. Yes, I hear that. I know we're at 3:32. And so we're coming to the limits of the time I requested. I don't know if there are any last burning questions, but I do want to both say thank you and be respectful of your time. Is that a burning question? I can't tell because you're on mute.
No, what I was going to say to Dr. Hennig is I might reach out separately, but we'll let you go now.
Oh, that's fine. You know, I've got great fondness for DC and DC schools, and you know, these things are a chance for me to spout off, but also for me to learn what's going on. So that's fine. I'd be happy to have exchanges with anyone.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome. Nice talking to you all. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Oh, Professor Hennig, there's a question in the chat. Any good reading material you would recommend on this issue?
Yes, well, Ruth has the classic book right in front of her.
I would just say this is the other one I have by you that I actually too blurry here, but it's the end of exceptionalism in American education, and I have to say I found it really fascinating. And it is to everybody else. It's a lot of what he was saying, that across all these different issues, states and governance structures, everything sort of being tossed up. But I thought it was very enlightening, illuminating about kind of the rules of the game and ways to think.
Thank you. And I don't want to just push myself. Let me think about that a little bit. I mean, you know, because there's not been as much as you'd expect on DC itself, at least in terms of book kind of stuff. Let me, you know, I'm sure you've got the National Academy report from a while back and things like that. So let me think if I can come up with something helpful to suggest.
Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
All right, I am going to switch gears a bit because we are coming up to the end of our deadline for our survey. And so Darren has been kind enough to put together a quick overview of like just a demographic report on who's taken the survey so far and where we are in the outreach. So I'm going to turn over to Darren.
Thanks. Yeah, I can just quickly go over demographic, like who responded to the survey so far. Just a reminder of the questions we asked, like the overarching questions. Some like the next steps around the report, as well as lessons learned so far in putting this out. So starting with the demographics of this, we did fall short. I feel on reaching our goals. I'm going to share my screen just to provide this information, but I'll also share the link to this as well in the chat. So here's the link to, wait a minute. Yep, to the I wanted to make sure I had the right link to the dashboard. So this is something that can be shared. I feel like I didn't want to go into the findings too much because it's still open. And so if somebody watches this, I don't want this to like impact how they're answering the survey if they haven't taken it already, but just to give you a quick sense. So with the survey so far, we have so far completed about 1,000 people have completed the survey. We've had a total of about 1,400 people respond to it with about 75% completion rate. And what I have up here, so an overwhelming amount, 840 are current DC parents, about 52 are guardians like grandparents, 27 students. I was hoping to boost that a bit to hopefully 100, as well as 349 residents who didn't fall into those categories. There was one other thing I wanted to share. Now I am completely.
Can you tell us about ward or
Yes, I'm going to get to that in a
oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
I just realized what I also wanted to share with this is the goals themselves. I meant to have that up. So just give me just a moment. I just had those up and now they are completely missing. Oh, here we go. Okay. It's like hiding behind this. Sorry. Give me one more moment. Like sharing my screen, it's like blocking out everything on here.
Like all the controls.
Yeah, like all the windows that I had up are now like
I
complete.
definitely get it.
So just give me one moment here. I also had, I think I accidentally just closed the window that I was really hoping for. So apologies, give me just one more moment. I might have to just go back in here and just pull it up again. Here we go. Okay, now I can share it. I just didn't, I also want to be careful not to give away like anything that might be sensitive on here. That's why I also stopped sharing my screen. Okay, so just a reminder, our goals were 2,000 respondents, with a large portion coming from wards 5, 7, and 8. Title I of at least 75% of respondents would belong either as a family or a student attending a Title I school. 70% of respondents would be African American, Black, 25% Hispanic, Latino, Latinx, and respondent role 5% would be, so about at least 100 students, at least 100 grandparents. And these are just like a few, there are other goals as well. So when I switch to the demographics, we fall short of things like having 100 students. Or in this case, since there's less than 2,000, having 5% students responding. That was not the case. So it wasn't like we reached the percentages or the numbers. So we fell short in a few areas. When it comes to student services, most of the respondents, about 600 out of almost 900, did not have children that or were students that received services like IEPs or 504 plan, or were part of an ELL program. The type of school the children or that the student or the child attends, most were DCPS. We're still trying to boost the public charter school. I reached out to DC Public Charter School Board, so they helped, and that actually was boosted a bit over the past 2 days. So they've shared our survey in their Twitter account and reached out to their parent groups to share that out. But we fell short of a representative sample of public charter schools. For the school level, mostly elementary school, which is fine. Like, this is pretty much a representative sample or close enough. What wards people live in? Ward 3 by far had the most respondents. Wards, we were hoping for an overrepresentation of wards 5, 7, and 8. Unfortunately, we don't have those numbers. But these aren't percentages, these are the number of people who responded to this. And again, this is where they reside. And so we fell short of that goal as well. Race and ethnicity, again, we wanted overrepresentation, which we fell short of for Black, African American, and Hispanic. But we do have like over 100 Hispanic, Latinx. Sorry for the crying in the background. And one other thing that I wanted to point out here is how they came across the survey. Most came from other, and then I don't share it here just so I don't identify anything, but this is something to look back on for lessons learned and how to get this survey out to more people. So yes, the good news is we crossed the 1,000-person threshold. We have over 100 people in, or we have enough to compare the different demographics in terms of ward and I believe race would be something that we can compare. If there were too few people answering these, I think that you wouldn't really be able to compare, but things like school level, for example, we could say, okay, these are the needs for elementary school. The respondents said these are the top level needs, or these are the top level improvements they'd like to see, and so on and so forth. So that's kind of a breakdown of the demographics. Just a reminder, the overarching questions were, how are people in the city experiencing the education system and what improvements they'd like to see. And so July 30th, this Saturday, once it closes, the reporting on this will show what the responses are on those two overarching questions. And then I could go into finer detail, but I think I'll leave it there for now. So one of my questions that I can pose to you and also offline is, what are the top comparisons that you would like to see in terms of questions? So for example, by ward, do you want to see how people's answers were different? I wouldn't recommend going further than maybe 3 different categories, because it would take a lot of time to analyze that data. But comparisons between, I would recommend by ward, by I would say race, ethnicity, and by whether or not the child receives services or not. Just based, and this is more based on,
Those are the 3 I was actually thinking that I would want. I saw Rep. Martinberg motion. Yeah.
So forget what I was gonna say, because I think it wasn't relevant, but the one, I think those would be the top 3. The other one that I think would be worth putting in would be level of school,
okay,
if we could do a 4th.
yeah, absolutely. So I'm gonna work with Susie starting next Monday to build out both a project plan. So what are the deadlines? When do we want to get drafts out? And I know we're out for August. So what would a presentation on this look like? As well as working on this report in tandem of the focus groups, which I'll discuss in a moment. But just like Monday, I'll really work on the project plan around getting a report out so that this can help inform the recommendations from the committee. One last thing that I wanted to touch on for the survey is just some lessons learned. I reached out to the public charter school board. They also have a survey out, and they kind of are experiencing something similar where they actually extended their timeline as well, just to get as many people as possible to respond to their survey. And I'm looking for that that link right now. But it's difficult because it's over the summer, so hearing from a lot of people. But they did mention things like putting up flyers, going to like libraries, putting up flyers, but also working with a vendor. I think these are things where, like, when we have goals in place for targeted, like hearing from like a good representative sample, hiring a company to like, or a vendor to go and help us with that. So I think it's good to have like members helping, but also a third party to really get out in the city who like are just very, this is what they do. Working with a vendor, I think would boost a lot of those, especially in the summer when everyone's out for summer. I think that would be a good lessons learned. I think another thing is further refining those goals, like just taking what we have and like even going deeper into what is a good, what are these goals? If these are good, great, but like reflecting on this process and seeing if there needs to be a refinement on that goal. So I'll stop there for now before jumping on the focus group. But are there any other questions?
I don't have any questions. I think before we talk about, I think it might be helpful to talk about the focus groups before talking about the project plan, just so it like more fully, the context more fully, is a little more linear. Yeah.
I also want to say that just kind of getting a broad overview of the responses to these, I think these will be helpful. Like a lot of themes did come up and a lot of very strong responses on certain issues came up. I think some of them align with the fall engagement from last year, as
Okay.
well as from the Office of the Ombudsman, Office of Student, like what we're hearing from our sister offices,
Yeah,
they align with those as well. And so I think a lot of this will feed into the final recommendations for this.
that's exciting. I know no
Yeah.
spoiler alerts yet, but I'm excited about it.
And Ruth, did you have any questions or anything for?
No, I mean, I mean, it's Thursday. I guess if we're genuinely closing on Saturday night, there's not a lot to do about it, but I am concerned with not having, just the extent to which in certain categories we're just way off. So I would say the ones that strike me the most are the charters, which there's just no way around. It would be great for the racial breakdown to be different, but as you say, I think there's enough of a end size in every group that we can do some comparisons, but with the charters is really a problem. And
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
no, that's all.
What I'm thinking about is to address the not meeting those goals. I think we can overrepresent in the focus groups, having 8 to 12 people, but doing an overrepresentation to address where we fell short in the survey.
Yeah. And I mean, yes, I think that makes sense. I also think that our goals were in many regards a oversampling of populations that we tend not to hear enough from. And so while we didn't meet yet, I mean, like we'll get closer. I mean, I have a big event on Saturday, so I'm hoping to gen up some more responses. So I'll be out in the streets literally. We didn't meet our goals that we set as a committee. We did actually do really well compared to just like other outreach efforts and like with the response that we got. Like we didn't meet our goal of 2,000, but surveying 1,000 is actually pretty strong, and having a few hundred from 7 and 8 is actually really good too, if we think about it. So I think they were the right goals to set. I think our framing definitely needs to be like, what are our lessons learned? Because that's where I hope we get to. Yeah.
This survey, I think, laid a lot of groundwork for future survey research. I think we have like a foundation, I think, that that's usable and can be refined, as well as I plan on meeting with PCSB on their lessons learned and like just comparing notes so that we can just further refine this process and just meaningful community engagement, just getting better and better at this, I think is like one huge plus from this survey. So I just want to throw that out there.
No, thank you, Darren, just for keeping us on track and all the work you're putting into this. I definitely appreciate it. All right, let's talk focus groups. So we have some changes. And we will also talk about this, I guess, more at the working session too. We have a lot going on as the board. As far as work, and some other work timelines have changed too. So we are actually in the process, and I believe it already went out, that instead of doing the focus groups in-house, we are bidding out the focus groups, which is why they have not started yet. So we're looking at still doing them in August. That's not changed, but we're looking forward to having a vendor do them. Darren, what What else am I missing? That's my intro to
I
it.
have,
Like,
I can.
I know
can
you have
jump
more
in.
information.
And you just reminded me, another exciting part of this survey, one of the two questions asked were, one, are you interested in getting updates on this survey and the results on the survey and the recommendations? And another question was, are you interested in participating in a focus group? Both, we had about 50% of over 1,000 people responding that they are interested in it. And so they shared their contact information. In fact, during the survey while it was open, I shared out, hey, we extended this. Can you help share out this survey? And so that was really great that they're interested in learning more about this process and what like I helped remind them of the purpose of the survey, but also that recommendations are coming. And so it keeps it on the radar. But we have a lot of people. So when it comes to recruiting, once the survey closes, I will start reaching out to everyone who was interested in this, create sort of a chart that again goes for that goal of representation. But I think we should not have too hard of a time getting 8 to 12 people for both focus groups. One will be in English and one will be in Spanish. We also are working to get translators. I think we are pretty much there for getting translators, Spanish translators to help with the vendor that would facilitate the focus group. I think I have that right. But in terms of recruitment, I think we're good on that end, and more to come on that. I'll provide offline updates, but I think we're really good. I think it's, again, exciting that over, I think about 500 people shared interest in participating.
Especially, I mean, like I'm super excited about that because one of the things we talked about was just like the energy and the enthusiasm or lack thereof around governance as a topic. And so having the survey as an entry point for people to talk more and engage in this issue more is awesome. Also, I'm super appreciative that we were able to put into practice what the Office of Racial Equity told us was a best practice as far as like keeping people updated and like showing them like what happens next in the process and what's happening with their information. I think that is definitely something we should continue to do and be really proud of. Like we listened. Goes not
Absolutely.
to people, but like to what they told us we needed to do. Go ahead,
So,
jump in.
Yeah, just one follow-up question on the surveys is at some point, how will this work? Will we suggest to the vendor questions? Is the vendor going to suggest questions to us that we go over? And how is that all going to happen if they're starting in August?
Great question. So that was actually something I was going to jump on. So I'm working on drafting the questions for this. They will look very similar to the questions in the survey, but will allow like just asking a major question and giving the focus group room to then dive deeper. What do you mean by X, Y, and Z? What improvements would you make? And they say X, and then the facilitator would say, go on, tell us, could you tell us more about this? And so these are just very high level, but sticking to the survey just to like really go into depth about that. They will be writing, the vendor would write the report, and then that would further inform, as I understand it, further inform the recommendation. So we'd have a survey report and a separate focus group report. And the focus group report would sort of reinforce the questions from the survey. So I'll share out questions that I draft early next week to the committee that once approved, I will share with whichever vendor we go with, share that with them. In the statement of like I know that we would provide the questions to them.
Yeah, I mean, I think the quick and dirty answer is the questions are still ours. The focus group has the same purpose. The questions are still ours and still serve the purpose of kind of like getting that qualitative with aspect of many of the things we were able to get some quantitative feedback around in the survey. It literally is the facilitation that we're building out, not the design of the focus groups. And on the back end, like the compilation of the information. We will also see a draft report as the committee. And of course, like we can listen into the focus groups and that type of thing. But
Oh,
it
that'd be
really
great.
is a capacity, like Darren is we have a small but mighty staff, and we want to keep them as mighty as possible. So it really is just an added capacity issue.
And also, so the final report that I put, if we get a winning bidder for this vendor, I put down that their final report would be due September 2nd. Just a little over a week before the back to school event, and so and giving time to further write out the recommendations. But September 2nd would be give them enough time to facilitate, analyze, and draft a report that would go to the members, and after feedback, finalize the report. So that would be September 2nd.
Yeah,
That a report would be published.
yeah, the crunch for us will be between that when the report is delivered and the fall engagement sessions, because we will have engagement sessions as a committee to start to get feedback around our draft recommendations. So it is a tight turnaround, but we want to make sure, especially since we're going to put so much energy into making sure people are available, aware, and engaged of the fall engagement. We still want to make sure that we lean into that opportunity as a committee. So that's the place where we'll have a decent amount of distilling to do.
So I think next steps for the focus group would be to get at the questions, but also the recruitment goal, like the goal for who would make up should I make some recommendations and then just get feedback on that? Or did you have something right off the bat that I should just?
Well, I think it's the places where we fell short of our goal that we really want to lean into, right? So like I would really want to hear from 7 and 8. I would want to hear from I should say 5, 7, and 8. 5, 7, and 8. I would really want to hear from if we could get a student to do it, if we could get some not parents, but other family members or guardians. If we can get some of them, if we can get a couple people who are receiving the services that we identified, so like English language learner, have a 504 plan, IEP, like those types of things. I think those are the places that we would want to lean into as far as like over representation in the focus groups. Yeah.
And so there would be one English focus group. So it would be made up of maybe like I'll like kind of come back with like something offline of just like, okay, this is what it looks like on paper.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like, yeah, we can sketch it out.
And it will be at in person at the office 441. So we'll secure something.
Oh, okay.
That's yeah, what we're thinking. Shoot, I had another question, but anything else? Like I think I was gonna reiterate my like next steps on my end, but anything else that I should think of? So next steps will be next Monday, start the report with Susie, like building out both the project plan and start the report itself. We're hoping to have the survey report by the third week of August.
Okay.
And then also the focus group questions and participant goals, as well as like finding a vendor, finalizing all of that. And then the only other thing is, I guess offline, since we're not meeting in August, the back to school event, just like getting a better idea of the content and materials that will be shared. I know
We have the option to meet in August. I think that for our committee, since we just have so much going on, we should hold the time. I don't think we should automatically, I know some of our other committee meetings are canceled, but I think just given where we are, we should hold the time because we might need to use that for just like something, feedback, whatever and it doesn't have to be a full hour and a half, but just so we have a appointed time and place in case we need to work through things, we can do it. So we'll keep ours on the books, I think.
Okay, awesome. Well, a lot of exciting things that are coming at us really fast.
Can I jump in on one thing?
Yeah,
Of
yeah.
course, yeah.
So the one thought I have on the focus groups as well as on the engagement is to pick up on this idea that Henning talked about today around the transparency, and it may be too wonky, but it might be worth asking people whether they can get the information that they want. And are there specific ways in which they would like to have different kinds of information more available? Again, it's a little wonky. It may not really work for a general audience, but it might be worth pushing in there.
Ebony Rose, do you want to respond?
No, I mean, I think I hear that. I think we should take a note of it, and I think we just need to look at the questions. So I think that's my initial reaction, and I know that as part of the conversation we're going to have is where do we lean in the fall engagements too? Because I hear you on it being too wonky too, or like how do we there's two questions. One is like the alignment to the questions we've asked so far in the survey. The other is just like how do we position some of the wonkier concepts so that people can interact with them in a way that is accessible and authentic and like adds value to the conversation. And so I think one of the things we'll have to explore is is that the focus groups, is that the fall engagement sessions, like what is the vehicle for that? So
Yeah, I think it would be more the fall engagement probably.
yeah.
And I think narrowing down the
Right.
structure of that and how long it will be and where it will be. So
Mhm.
so I think as we get closer, I think those kind of questions will be much more easy to answer as we
Yeah.
get closer.
Yeah. And yeah.
But it is something good. Yeah, it's helpful for me to think of too.
Yeah. You see my wheels are turning. Yeah. Okay.
Well, I'll look out for that book too, Ruth. Thanks for pointing that out. I think it was really interesting. I love that kind of.
Yeah, like I said, that exceptionalism one I thought was actually more interesting. But anyway, all right. Goodbye, guys.
I think that's all we have anyway. So happy.
All right, Ebony Rose.
Bye, you all.